I did this next video because I often refer to Hobbesian state of war when I'm talking about just the decline of order and men working together to the point where you become a state of nature. And I think Hobbes says it best, where every person has a right to everything. And since resources are limited, it inevitably leads to conflict. In our society and our life in this world, it's kind of horrifying and tragic how cannibalistic life is. I mean, life literally eats itself just to survive. And this has come about before our existence. This is the order of things. I mean, it's tragic. You know, when you see one animal eating another animal, it's horrible and it's tragic for the animal being eaten. The animals that are eating the other animals are also disassociated from the pain and suffering of the animal that's being eaten. And that's like a necessary development for their own survival. And this is why empathy is so rare and beautiful, you know, and why people that are empathetic are part of a small group that should be cherished. You know, this is an advancement, an elevation out of the raw, like, tragedy and cannibalistic evolutionary determinism. You know, I mean, evolutionary determinism, it's like the existentialists say, it's indifferent. You know, it doesn't care about the suffering of one because it's so much larger. We all participate in a situation that's so much larger than us. It's horrible and it's tragic. And it's why I have such a hard time with optimism. You know, it's like you're just ignoring this tragedy that we're living in. You know, I'm not saying you have to dwell on it. It will kill you to dwell on it. Stress kills you. Like, you have no choice but to ignore it. You should allow yourself to feel the tragedy just so you can get to the truth. The truth is, you know, partially tragic and devastating, and you should sort of pre-grieve or pre-deal with it by not being delusionally optimistic, but having a balance, even though that balance might hurt you. And empathy, it's known that empathy is a trap, that, you know, you can't even be too empathetic because you feel the pain of those who are suffering. And if you do it too much, if you fall into the empathy trap too much, you actually suffer the pain of those who suffered, and we re-suffer that pain. And so there has to be a balance, you know. Don't take it on too much. Go beyond sympathy, but not too far into the empathy trap. So today I'm going to discuss the Hobbesian state of nature, and I think as a subset of that is the Hobbesian state of war. It's interesting getting your mind around what Thomas Hobbes is talking about when it comes to a state of nature and state of war. Each individual is equal to every other individual in the state of nature. The only advantages one has is the element of surprise and one's allegiance with others. The two cardinal virtues of war are force and fraud. The state of war is all against all. Every person has a right to everything. Thomas Hobbes, a 17th century English philosopher, famously described a hypothetical state of nature as a war of every man against every man. This is often referred to as the Hobbesian state of war. In this state, humans are naturally equal, but also driven by self-preservation and a desire for power. Without a central authority to enforce rules or maintain order, people are free to do whatever they think necessary to survive. This leads to a constant threat of violence and conflict. According to Hobbes, the state of nature is a miserable and chaotic place where life is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Hobbes used this grim depiction of human nature and society to argue for the necessity of a strong centralized government, which he called the Leviathan, to maintain order and peace. I believe that was written in 1651. He contended that individuals would rationally choose to give up some of their natural freedoms to a sovereign power in exchange for security and stability. Key characteristics of the Hobbesian state of war: absence of government. In the state of nature, there is no central authority or government to enforce laws or mediate disputes. As a result, individuals act solely based on their self-interest and desire for self-preservation, conflict, and insecurity. According to Hobbes and the state of nature, everyone has a right to everything, leading to a constant potential for conflict. The lack of a higher authority means that individuals live in a condition where there's no assurance of peace, resulting in a war of all against all. Bellum omnium contra omnes. Life in the state of war. This phrase captures the bleakness of a world without security, where fear and danger are constant companions. Natural equality. Hobbes argues that individuals are naturally equal in their capacity to harm one another. While people may differ in strength or intelligence, these differences are not significant enough to prevent conflict, as even the weakest can kill the strongest through guile or allegiance with others. Rationality and self-preservation. Despite the chaos of the state of nature, Hobbes believes that individuals are rational and seek to avoid violent death. This desire for self-preservation ultimately motivates individuals to seek peace and establish a social contract. The social contract. To escape the state of war, Hobbes argues that individuals collectively agree to surrender some of their freedoms and submit to the authority of a sovereign power. This social contract forms the basis of a stable society where laws and government provide order and protection. In essence, the Hobbesian state of war is a theoretical construct that underscores the necessity of political authority and social contracts to achieve a peaceful and organized society. It's just sort of common sense, you know? If you don't have a centralized government, then everybody has to act as their own centralized government. And in that case, every individual is at war with every other individual. When I was reading about Hobbes, there was another point when he described that the state was acted as an individual. So we can't ever get to the point, like we really try with the United Nations, to sort of get above the state. Right now, every state is in a Hobbesian state of war, and we counteract that through having federations and grouping the states together, like the European Union or the federal government in the United States. But it's an infinite regress, right? Because there's always going to be another state to add on. We're always at this point where there's no way to solve this infinite regression. We reduce it, so for all intents and purposes, it has very little effect. But it's this infinite regression where each state has to, each entity is higher up and has more power but less influence. I see it in the aerospace industry too, right? The auditors on the ground have a certain amount of power and they work for a registrar. And then there's an enforcement group that controls the registrars that has power over the registrars. They have the most power, but they also have the least reach and they do the least enforcement. So what is it to have more power than the people below you, but to have less enforcement or less inclusion? It's almost like that extra bit of power only disturbs the system. So it's like you can't use it. They give it to you, but you can't use it. And so there's a problem there. There's a problem of power balance where adding powers on top of powers at some point just becomes inefficient. And it doesn't make the difference at the ground level that you want. Anyway, that's a different topic. If you guys like this kind of philosophical subject matter, help us out by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Thanks.